Hi. The beginning of October 2014, there was a group of people marching from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. to raise awareness about climate change. And they had been marching since March of 2014. And when they got to Cleveland Heights, I joined them. And I walked about 500 miles to Washington, D.C. And each day was hard. I had been really, really depressed. And being out in my body often was agony. But I was surrounded by people who gave me hugs and who were there for each step and who knew what it was like to be in pain because they had been doing it for 7 months. And we shared good food and we laughed, and I hadn't laughed in I don't know how long. And it was amazing. And a lot of people kind of looked at us and jeered and being like, is it effective? What are you doing to stop climate change or to affect anything just by walking across the country? But I can say, for me and for the people on the march, it helped bring us back to life. Helped us remember that we're not crazy, that these things matter, that it's safe to talk about them. There was a day somewhere in Pennsylvania, mid-October. I was holding a day of sacred silence. Someone always on the march was holding silence, was having a day of silence. And then when they wanted to stop, they would approach somebody and they would give them a hug and they would pass the silence. And if that person didn't feel like being silent, they would hold the silence and they'd go pass it on to someone else. But usually people would talk with them and be like, hey, you can pass it to me, I'd love to, whatever. And we walked into a community and there was a community town hall where local people had set up a lot of food to share with us. And after the meal, they had everyone introduce themselves. And people got up, said where they were from, why they were marching, about some of their experiences. And when it came to me, I stood up. And I was so grateful I was holding silence because I didn't know what I would say. But I was able just to look at people and be seen. And people afterwards, still while I was saying silence, was like, wow, that was so powerful. I was like, I didn't do anything. A couple weeks later, I believe it was Halloween 2014, the day before we would march into Washington, D.C., everyone who was still on the march gathered in a room. I guess you can't see the stage, a little bit bigger than the stage right here, about 70 people. And the feel in the room, the general atmosphere was one of such joy and gratitude and love. And a man stood up, whose name I think we might have called him Dr. Bob or Dr. John, I'm not sure. He stood up and he looked around and he said something like, this is what love wants to do. And there was just sort of like this sigh of yes. The coming together to sharing life with other people intimately and closely, and to talk about the things that matter, and to grieve and to support each other. So as people were sharing their last words, not last words, but sort of a kind of final summation or something they wanted to share with the group before we walked to DC, and then people would start going their separate ways, I stood up, and because I enjoyed the thought of saying this, and I enjoy sort of bonking people's reality a little bit, I stood up and I said something like, I don't really care about climate change all that much. and I heard a lot of like the type of things you hear from people who are arguing with us on the walk. But that sort of sigh of like, what are you talking about? You know, they had seen me, they had marched with me, we had talked. And what I said in explanation was, every day on the walk, we've talked about and we've witnessed and we've seen ways in which pollution and environmental destruction has affected people's lives right here and now, today. From people developing asthma in cities like Pittsburgh from pollution from plants there, to people who had been displaced because of hydraulic fracturing. And the things that had motivated me to go on the walk often had nothing specifically to do with carbon pollution and the heat trapping effects of that gas and the expansion of industry and things like this. It was often very personal things like conflicts between me and my family and my friends, and addiction and loneliness, and people who are going hungry or who don't have a place to stay at night. It's like, these are the things which touch my heart and which hurt and which I'm grieving while I'm on this walk with you. And the climate change is happening, but the effects are so far off that sometimes it's hard to care about that as much as I care about the person who I see on the street who's asking for money, for the mother who needs help taking care of her child, and for the kids who come from a broken home, whatever. So, I met some of y'all at Coney Island, because largely I'm addressing this to members of the Amanda Palmer community. If you've been listening up till now, you maybe didn't know that. Coney Island on August 23rd, was it? I think. Of this year. I met so many of you. It was amazing. And some of you stood out as bright lights, and some of you I look forward to meeting more. And I showed up, and I didn't have a place set up to stay. I had just come back from Prague. I had gotten like 8 hours of sleep in 3 days, like sleeping intermittently on buses and in chairs and on the plane, and was feeling sick and tired and exhausted and hadn't set up a place to stay. And Stephanie Caslin was like, I can be your fallback. And as the evening went on, I looked for, other options, and after the concert didn't have any other options, and I feeling a little bit embarrassed that I hadn't, figured something out, and a little ashamed. I give her a call and I'm like, Stephanie, can I please clash your space? And she was like, absolutely, no problem, don't even worry about it, we got you. And I was like, yay. I was so tired. And my fallback plan was probably just to stay up and wander the streets of New York in a sleepy stupor. I've done stuff like that before. So thank you, Stephanie. And she bought me dinner that evening, and the following morning she bought me breakfast. And the previous evening, walking with Gavin to their apartment and sort of crashing there for half an hour before the show, and then walking on the Coney Island boardwalk and hanging out with them, she asked me what I did for a living. And a question always brings up so much, because it's like, so tell me your autobiography. But also because a lot of people have jobs where they go and they do something and someone pays them for what they do. And for the last 6 years, I haven't. And often it brings up shame, often it brings up sort of unsettled uncertainty, anxiety about my future and the future in general, and thoughts of, I'm not really doing something job-like. So many things. And so often what I've been telling people recently is I'm a full-time peace activist. And often people just kind of like smile and nod, or they don't know what to make of it. But she was like, awesome. And then she's like, tell me more. It was so nice having someone affirm and inquire and want to know more. And the stories that I've been telling just now is a piece of what that means to me. I think that some of y'all in the forums have seen me post some of the things that I posted, maybe read some of the comments I've made. So you might have a little more of a sense of what that means to me. And I look forward to sharing more in the future. But I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you for listening. Take care.